and welcome to XML Stories, brought to you by Publisher Speak in collaboration with Markup UK. In this series, we bring to you a variety of case studies and stories about how XML has helped publishers accelerate their publishing, deliver high quality content, and save costs. Publisher Speak is a community platform for publishing professionals. We bring to you regular updates on what's the latest and greatest in the publishing industry. Our partner for this series is Markup UK. Markup UK is a non-profit organization of XML practitioners who aim to educate the professional community about XML and markup technologies. Our guest for today is Ari Nordstrom. Hey, Ari, welcome to Publisher Speak. Just to give an introduction about yourself to our audience, can you tell us a little bit about what you do, Ari?
So I'm Ari Nordstrom. I'm an independent contractor, I suppose you would say. I've been doing markup languages, HTML, XML for the last 25 years, usually for publishing, for technical writing, sometimes legal publishing, all kinds of stuff. Everything that involves angle brackets, I really do.
Fantastic. Can I just simply call you the XML guru? If you're okay with that.
Oh, yeah, I suppose you might. There's an XML guru in Czechia, I believe. So I'm the SGML guru. That is actually my Twitter handle.
Okay, all right. See, I wasn't far off. So in today's episode, I think we wanted to talk about this very interesting case that you came across, which is what was it? Producing manuals for a drilling machine company. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So it's a company that produces drilling rigs, really. So they are these huge machines that you might use them for mining, for taking samples in the ground. You might, go hundreds and hundreds of meters into the rock or beneath a rock layer to investigate what's in there. And depending on what you do, you buy different kinds of drills. So you'd have a basic platform, you might have, the drill itself, you might have a tower, you might have a power supply that could be anything from, something electric that you plug in the wall to a diesel engine, if you're out in the desert drilling something. And these are huge things, but they're portable really, and so they're all individual machines. So you configure those according to what you need, what your specific needs are. You buy, and you get a bunch of documentation. So you get a user guide, you get a sort of a service manual kind of thing, and they all come in binders. And if you are a non-English speaker, they come in your language. But it really is an individual products, and so it should have individual documents, so describing your particular equipment and nobody else's, right?
Prior to talking to you about this particular case, I would have not associated markup, XML, SGML, all of these terminologies with drilling rigs. But you're saying that XML and markup helped a company that was manufacturing drilling rigs. So what was this problem that they were having that required an XML solution? That's very interesting. I wouldn't have put these together.
Yeah. So if you're a manufacturer, large or small, and you write a manual, a user guide or something like that to document your product, you might do it in a word processor. So Microsoft Word would be a really simple case. Or if you are sort of into more large scale documents, you'd use something like Adobe FrameMaker, which is often used by technical authors to author user guides, service manuals, etc. But the problem is that is a proprietary product. It's a binary file that you do. It's owned by Adobe in this case. So they make this product. And so what you can and cannot do using that file is up to Adobe. So if they support translations, you can translate, right? If they support your translation agency being able to use memories, translation memories, that sort of thing, which is really, really common and really useful, it's really up to Adobe to provide the functionality. If they support CJK languages, so Chinese, Japanese, Korean, they need to support that. And in this case, they didn't. And again, it was this has been some years, so I should say that FrameMaker does support some of those these days, but it certainly did not then. And so their problem was that they would write their manuals, 500-600 pages each, maybe more or less, depending on what you have in there. And remember, these are several products you buy as a unit. So your drilling platform consists of a number of components, all of which needs to be described in a manual. But they did in FrameMaker, which is a word processor. And so, if you send that off to being translated to, well, let's say Finnish, which is a really simple case of translation. So a Finnish page will require about 50% more space than English. So obviously your page breaks would be different. So once the document came back from translation, the technical authors would have to redo all the formatting, all the page breaks, placing of figures. Sometimes they would tweak, image sizes, put in extra line breaks, all kinds of stuff. All that took time. So whereas they would sell about 300-400 products, drilling equipment, these platforms each and every year, they managed to output maybe a dozen manuals, 12. So 12 customers would get sort of complete documentation, not exactly for their product, but sort of getting there, right? And this is a huge problem because if you buy something worth millions and millions, you want a proper manual for it. You paid for it, and they didn't have time. So this was the basic problem. Add to that they sold these things to the whole world, the entire globe, across the world, and they needed to translate that. So those costs were really prohibitive, and the time that they were spending on layouts, on just tweaking the content, trying to find the right file to copy and paste into something else, took for ages. They had no databases, they had no reuse of previously written content. The best they could do was copy and paste. So there's your basic problem.
Yeah, does the way you put it. I think that does sound like would have been a nightmare. So just to make sure that I got it right. So this was a company that was selling all kinds of drilling rigs. They had to, they probably were selling about 300 units, you said, in a year, but only 12 of their customers, you said, got manuals, and that was all because of not being able to.
That's not exactly right. So, I mean, they all got manuals, obviously, but they did not necessarily get manuals that described their product. They might get something that is fairly close, or something that was in the wrong language. So if you were, if you were in, Iraq, and you wanted a manual in Farsi, so that was a sort of an unusual language, and so you'd get the English one, because they just did not have the means to produce the Farsi language manual, which is, that is really the basic problem here. No time.
So how did you propose a solution? And so when you started working with this customer and you understood this particular problem, what was the approach that you took?
Again, I'm a markup consultant, and I've been, advocating XML and HTML before that for a very long time. And so I knew that, adding XML and writing everything in XML and automating publishing, automating translations, reusing content wherever possible would be the way forward. And obviously, there's also the fact that if you have a component that is the same regardless, all that changes when you sell that to two different customers is the name, or perhaps some properties, the diesel tank volumes. That is the only thing that differs between the two. So otherwise they would be, reusable for two different customers. So what we did was also add profiling, which means that you were able to say that, so this applies for profile A, meaning a smaller tank, and profile B, meaning a larger tank. And you could simply publish that in context A, smaller tank, context B, larger tank. And you could apply that sort of profiling, and I'm simplifying here, obviously, for any number of things, properties. So you had, let's say you had images of the completed platform. And one was with the smaller diesel engine and one with the larger. So they simply have different profiles. You would publish with that profile for customer A, that profile for customer B, and be done with it automatically.
That's actually very interesting. So let me just make sure that I understood that right? So you basically, what you did was take this content, pulled out all the bits that were reusable, that kept repeating, that weren't profile specific.
That is correct,
all the data that was related to a profile, you basically took it out into a profile. So all you then had to do was match the profile, lay the profile on top of the reusable content, and you get the content that was specific to a particular profile. I think that's just brilliant. See, that sounds all fine from a theoretical standpoint, but I'm sure that when you went in and actually started working on the project, all kinds of, you discovered a lot of things that you probably did not anticipate. So how difficult was the implementation to take what was there and make it into XML? And how long was this project? What were some of the challenges that you had to run into? Or were there challenges?
I guess the primary challenge then, and that always tends to be the case when you go from an unstructured format such as FrameMaker or Word to a structured one, is that if you write a manual in an unstructured format, there's nothing to stop you from breaking the rules in that format. So if you want a larger heading, you can have that if you think that's prettier. There's nothing to stop you. The problem is that if you take that document with lots of manual overrides and you convert that to XML, you have to account for those differences when you're converting, and you have to translate them into a cohesive whole. And that is always the problem. So that's always a challenge. These days, if I had done this project today, I would have better tools to compare the different versions of, let's say, the same source FrameMaker file. But back then, it was really more of a hit-miss kind of thing. So that was a big challenge. And we actually had an author go through, what he knew were the worst violations of the standard template and redo those. But other than that, the conversion actually was quite easy, because it's perfectly easy to convert a FrameMaker file to a sort of an XML format, and then take that XML format and convert it to your target DTD, so the document type definition that you use when you describe your XML and what is allowed. Another challenge was the mindset of the authors. getting them to take the leap to a structured way of authoring. A big challenge is to have them accept that they can't know what their content is going to look on the page, because you're not there yet. You don't know in which context your document is being published. You actually have no idea. So these days we only did a PDF because they went to print. I mean, they often went to places where you don't have an internet connection, nothing like that. So PDFs in a paper in a binder actually was the preferred way. But these days, you might publish to a mobile phone. You just have the mobile phone in your pocket, and if you needed to service your drilling equipment, you just pick up your phone and find the right spot in your document. But that document on your mobile phone will look very, very different from what is on a printed page. So that's a huge leap for an author who's used to writing using Word or FrameMaker, something like that. InDesign is very typically a problem too. But I've always found that if you're straight with them, if you're honest and tell this is the problem and you need to accept these tags, they get used to it, because once they can see that, oh my God, I no longer need to tweak the output at all, never ever, they tend to accept it. Because after all, they are hired by a company who requires, output, a lot of it, fast.
I
That
want to
answer your
just,
question?
yeah, I know it totally did. And I think I was just going to ask you to elaborate a little bit more on the mindset, because I think that must have been a huge challenge, simply because, like you said, you have to make the authors focus more on the content, not on the layout. So layout, you said, like you said, comes a little later.
Yeah.
Worry about the content first. Let's get the layout. So that's one mindset shift. But the other mindset shift also is in not being, you know, uh, is in trying to to follow a certain pattern on the layout, right? So you cannot just increase the size of the heading just because you want to for a particular layout anymore. So kind of like losing that ability to be artistic. So did you face that? I mean, were people like, hey, my manual is no longer pretty, it is looking more standard, but that's going to get you a lot more efficiency, right?
Common comment you get is that, why does it do the page break there? I would never do a page break right there. I would do it before that image, or something. And I would say that, okay, but are you willing to pay for it? So if you want the manual layout, you can have it, but it's going to take 3 or 4 times as long to do it. And you're going to have to do that for all of your output languages. And they didn't want that. I mean, they could see the benefits, because it was no fun having to, tweak the layout of, well, let's say a Finnish manual, because nobody knew Finnish. They had no idea what they were tweaking. So if you do that on, for 500 pages, it becomes fairly boring. And the upshot of automating all this and never having to bother about layouts when writing again is that you also don't have to copy and paste. You don't have to do all the repetitive things that you were used to doing, copy and paste from a different document and tweak that and change a word here, change a word there. You didn't have to do any of it. And all the standard information, in the beginning of every manual, you would have, explanations for your warning symbols, why you use this layout or this font for this kind of information, all the standard information. They would never ever have to write that again. They would just include it because it was already done once. And so all they had to do for a new manual was to do a link to the existing module. So this upshot, and it's a really nice thing to be able to do because you can focus on the actual changes to your content. And that, to me, that is an artistic thing too, because the artistry of an author is also about being able to express yourself clearly, unambiguously to an end user. And you can focus on that if you have the time, if you don't have to tweak layouts and all that.
I think that's very well put. Focus on what's really important, right? So which is the content.
Exactly.
Layout is going to be a byproduct of when you have the content structured right, you're able to get the kind of efficiency that you are looking for. So talking about efficiency, tell us what was the business outcome with this particular project. So what was the customer able to do now? What was the cost saving? What was the time saving? What did they actually achieve?
So they started out with outputting maybe a dozen manuals, so for a dozen customers. So you'd have 2 manuals usually for each, so 24 manuals a year. That's all they had time to do. After we did the system, there was training and all that stuff, but they went up very quickly to about 300 manuals sets, so 600 manuals actually per year. All of them translated to every single language they had to do. I think they had about 17 or 18 languages usually, and some of them would be CJK, some of them would be right to left languages, most of them Western, obviously. But all of that they could do with the same style sheets, with the same content, just the translated content. And that's a huge win. And you'd also get better quality, a much higher quality in your content, because you'd actually have time to proofread. You'd actually have time to have a think about how to express yourself well when, describing this new, power supply something. You'd have all that time. You'd have the time to do better illustrations because, they'd have photographs, they'd have 2D drawings, all kinds of stuff. They'd have, the call out stuff that describe every part in a 2D graphic. They'd have the time to do proper call out lists below the graphic. All of that profile to and for the end customer, which is a really nice thing. So I would say that was a huge win. And the next win, obviously, was that, again, they started out doing only PDFs. But a couple of years later, they realized that, hey, we can do HTML. So we can publish this on the web. And we also pointed out that, well, yeah, you can do mobile phones or tablets or whatever you like. We can do ebooks. We can do all of that. And it's not going to take you longer. It's going to take an implementation. Obviously, you always end up tweaking and changing your layout. But essentially, it's just a question of implementing more, adding more to the system. And I think that's just brilliant.
I think that's a significant win from 12 books to 300 books in a year. And you said without adding additional people, it was the implementation that got them there, right? So
it was the same people.
The same people who produced 12 books were now able to produce 300 books in a year. I mean, that is a phenomenal cost savings, a phenomenal increase in throughput. And what you mentioned was that the quality was also much higher because now they were focusing more on the content that changed. rather than
Yes.
worrying about all of this content, worrying about copy and pasting between the various different formats, various different books. I think this is a fantastic case study to hear about how XML transformed the story of publishing for this drilling machine company. I think, thank you so much, Ari, for sharing this case study with us. I think we know a lot of learning.
Thank you.
Power of XML, the power of structured content, I think came through in this particular story very, very well. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end of yet another episode on XML stories. Until we meet next time, stay safe and have fun. Bye.